Hello, and welcome to the MyHeritage webinar series. I'm Jeff Rasmussen, your host, broadcasting to you live from Middleton, Idaho. Today we have MyHeritage's Uri Ganon with us, who is live in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, to introduce the Census Helper to us, a fantastic new tool on MyHeritage to help us in our census research. Thanks to the more than 1,100 of you from 24 countries who have registered for the live webinar. So wherever and whenever you are, glad to have you with us. Uri Ganon has been working at MyHeritage since 2005, where he took on different challenges and roles in product development and product management. He has been part of the wild journey of MyHeritage from a small startup to a dominant company in the genealogy space. Among his involvement in key projects of the company, Uri was the original developer behind Family Tree Builder and the product manager of MyHeritage's genealogy search engine. He's been involved in projects such as Pedigree Map, Pedigree View, the Tree Consistency Checker, and many other projects, including Census Helper. Uri now lives and works in Toronto, Canada, and before joining MyHeritage, he has worked in other software startups in Israel, the United States, and Canada. So please put together your virtual hands and let's give Uri Ganon a nice warm webinar welcome. Hi, Uri, and welcome to the webinar.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for the great introduction.
Yeah, it's always nice to have you here, and really looking forward to this fun topic here today. And just give your PowerPoint a click, and then it will be the active program. Okay, it looks good, so the time's all yours.
Okay, hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about a relatively new tool called the Census Helper. We have launched this tool originally in order to help you with your research for the 1950 US Census that was just released, and we are frantically working on indexing it all and making it available. And this helps you already prepare your research for it, but it also is helpful for all the other censuses that we have on MyHeritage. So let's just go over a few bullets. What is the Census Helper? It's a useful and free tool that scans your family tree and compiles a list of your relatives in your tree who are very likely to be found in the census, in the collection that is on MyHeritage. So for the 1950, it will eventually allow you to research all of these people once those records are indexed. But for other censuses, it's already a tool that you can use. So it lets you easily organize your research for a particular census. As I mentioned, we started it for the US 1950 census, but we can now use it for other censuses of the US and other countries where we have full nationwide censuses. So let's start with simply, how do you get to this tool? When you go on MyHeritage to the main menu, on the right, the rightmost menu is called Research. If you hover over it, you will see that the drop-down menu appears, where there's all the different things you can do in the research section. And the last one with this new label is called the Census Helper. Click it, and what you will see eventually is a list like this. So by default, if you're an American, you will see the US 1950 census appear here because that's the latest US census. If you're from a different country, I am from Canada, it will actually show me the latest Canadian census that we have available. But I'll show you that you can easily switch between different censuses. When you first go to this screen, what you will see is this list slowly, or not so slowly, starting to appear on your screen. I have here on my tree 1,500 people, so it could take something like 5 to 10 seconds, and you'll see it's building up. If you have a larger tree, it could take a bit longer, but nevertheless, even if you don't have to go and look at all your tree, it immediately shows you the closest relatives that you have that could be in the census. So eventually, the list will appear like this. This is my actual tree. I'm not even American. I don't have a lot of family in the US, but it still finds quite a lot of people, in this case 58, that our census helper believes that they might or are likely to be found in the 1950 US Census. You can scroll down and look at all these people and eventually click research, which will lead you to the research page in our search engine, which lets you find records about this person. Let's continue here. And I want to explain this idea of the lower confidence results. So you can see that it showed me that I have 50-something, 58 results, but a lot of other ones, 704, that are what we call lower confidence, which are people that could also be in the census, but we don't have really very good evidence to confirm that, but not any evidence to contradict it. And I'll explain that in a bit. And here I have quite a complicated bullet list of information, but I'll just go over it very quickly. So for the census helper to show a person in the list, first thing is we need to know that this person was actually alive during the year of the census, in this case 1950. So if I know that the person wasn't even born in 1950 or has already passed away before 1950, then that person will not appear in the list. So that's one obvious thing. The second, so if you have information about births and deaths, then that's where we start. It also uses sometimes more complicated criteria, such as we don't know exactly when this person lived, but we know that, let's say, their parent only was born in 1948. So it's very unlikely, actually impossible, for them to have lived in 1950, and so on. So that's one thing. The second thing is we try to see if we have evidence for them to be alive in the US at that time. So we look at information of when they were born, when they were baptized, Christian, married, resided, died, buried in the US, and if so, that's good. And if not, we look at their parents and see if there is evidence that their parent lived in the US in a time that might predict that that person also lived in the States, or they had siblings, and so on. We also look for record matches, which are already confirmed or at least unrejected matches to existing records in other censuses or in Social Security Death Index or other US records that give us evidence that they have lived in the US. So if that's true, then we will show them in the list. And if we can't give information that they have lived in the US, we try to see if we know that they did not live in the US. And if so, they will be completely excluded from the list. And otherwise, that's bullet 4. It means that they will be shown, but only as lower confidence results. So this kind of explains generally how the census works and how it makes its predictions of likely, very likely, or potentially being in the census. Here are some examples, and I just picked up a few records from my 1950 census results. Here is an example of somebody that appears in the list because we know that she was born in 1921, and she would be 29 in 1950. And we know that she was born in the US, in New York. And we also have a match for her in the 1930 US Census in New York as well. So that is a good indication that they might be in the 1950 as well. Once we have the 1950 census and all of the states, including the New York, available, clicking here will potentially find that person. And you know which state to look for as well, because it's most likely New York as well. Here's another one where we know that the person was alive during 1950 because they were born in 1914, died in 2015, lived quite a long life, and died in New Jersey and was buried in New York. So they would be 36 in 1950, according to that. So that's a very likely result as well. So instead of you having to go over each person and figuring out does this person probably in the US Census, is it worthwhile for me looking for them there? The Census Helper gives you all the people that are likely or possibly have lived in 1950 in the US and makes it really easy for you to find them in the census. Here is another one. And in this case, the only information that we have is record matches to the 1930 and 1940 in Michigan and to the US Social Security Death Index that they died also in Michigan. So most likely they could be found in the Michigan records of the 1950 when they were 24. Here is another example where we don't know where that person lived at all, at least it's not recorded in my tree, but we know that her father died in Ohio. So that would make it likely for her to also be living in the US, if that's the case. So this is a few examples of how our Census Helper will determine whether to show a person in the list or not. Moving on. So if I click on the research button that I showed here, what it would do, it would, and this is an example of a Samuel Goodman in my tree that I know was born in 1899 and died in 1974. So clicking on that research opens a search results page in our search engine. And because the 1950 is only very partially indexed at this point, the only thing we can offer at this point is to search in all the other census collections that we have on MyHeritage. It's not that useful yet, but once we have the full census indexed, we will switch it to be searching only in the 1950. And I'll show you how that works for another collection down the road here. As I mentioned, this is the 1950 census collection on MyHeritage. We know that there are going to be 150 and so million records eventually. Right now, there's only 6.6 million indexed, which is less than 5%. So that's why we are waiting for more action happening here, which will be in the next coming weeks or month at most, where we will have made significant gains and indexed a lot more of those records. Okay, so we understand the value of this for the 1950 census, and the value will be much greater when we actually have that collection all indexed. But from here, where it says 1950, this is a drop-down that you can open and find other censuses. So here we can see that all the other US censuses are there as well. And if you go down that list, you'll see that there are the England and Wales censuses, Canadian censuses, and scroll down, we have also Ireland, Scotland, Denmark, Norway, and France, which are countries that MyHeritage has full nationwide censuses for a particular year. We are not making this available for censuses of not a full country, and we have quite a lot of them. For example, all the state censuses in the US, and we have a lot of censuses for different regions and countries in Netherlands, Germany, and so on. And we also have censuses that are not for a particular year. Some of them are spanning many years, and so therefore it's hard to determine whether a person is there or not because there isn't a particular year to look for. So this tool is available for full nationwide censuses in a particular year. So let's select the 1940, which is the previous decade. And here I can see similar results, but this time for the 1940. So ages of everybody here will be 10 years less than for the 1950. And we're looking for people who have not died between 1940 and 1950 as well. So the criteria is different, obviously. Another interesting thing that you see here is because this collection already exists and is complete and has been here for a while, we already have record matches. These brown indicators is the icon that we use throughout our product for what we call record matches. And record matches is an automatic system that we run in the background that tries to find connections between people in your tree and existing records on MyHeritage, be it census records, as we see here, and other records such as birth and marriage and death records and newspaper articles and immigration records and military records and so on. Here we found already somebody in my family, Harry, that we already know that they're in the 1940 because our system already found that record for you. So this is an example of, you will see it here. Obviously, there is not much to research, but you could click on the icon of the record match and go directly to this record match and look at it, confirm it if you haven't confirmed. If it were confirmed, you would see a green checkbox here. So you know that this isn't, you can confirm. You can, like you can do with any record matches, potentially move some of the information from that record to your tree, such as where they lived and other family members that you might not have in your family tree that you can infer from the census record. Now, here is another one that I want to show how the research works. As you can see, some of the buttons here have a lighter orange color. This is to indicate that you have already clicked this button for that record, for this person, and you have initiated a research. This allows you to visually see where you need to go and you haven't gone yet. So let's click at Ida Goodman, who was born Epstein, and she was born in 1871, died in 1947, and we know that she lived in Pennsylvania because we already have record matches to the previous decade, but we don't have a record match for 1940, otherwise she would have a brown icon here. So if I click here, like we saw before with the 1950, now it would run a search, particularly for the 1940 census, because this collection is complete and is available for searching. So here we have some examples of records that we found for this particular name. And we know when she was born, 1871, and we know when she died. So the search automatically runs for all these parameters. And here is an example of maybe somebody that is her. The name matches. We know it's Pennsylvania. We know that she was born on that year. You know that in censuses, the only thing that was recorded is the age, which actually always means that we know the year of birth plus minus a year, because it depends on whether she was born in half of the year before the census or after the census. So that's actually a good match. It was 1871, but here it says 1872, Pennsylvania. But in order to figure out maybe that is a match or not, I will show you that in back when you look at the record here, we'll look at it again. There is this next to the research button, there is a 3-dot menu that allows you to do a few things. View her tree, which is what I'm going to show you, and it gives you a good indication of her close family. View profile, it does the same thing, goes to a full page of all the information about this person. And also remove from the list. Remove from the list is when you know that this person is definitely not in the census, and the census helper made a prediction that they could be, but it was wrong. It always happens. So this is a way to just remove this record from this list and not see it again. But let's click here on View Her Tree, and we see here she is. And I'm actually shrinking the tree a bit to show only one generation around her, which is something you can do in the tree, helpful. And as we see here that she was married to Abraham, who already died in 1940. So she did not have a husband in the census. Otherwise, it would have shown that in the census record she has a husband. She has many children, among them Samuel, who would be 41 in the census. Other children that maybe have left the house already or passed away already. So it could be, based on the record, that this is the family unit that existed in 1940. And that is, in fact, a record. We can go interview the record and see all the information, but that's what you would do as a genealogy researcher to try to figure out if this record is of this person and what can I learn about it. So this is basically the usefulness of this tool. Record matches are found when we know our record matching algorithm finds a very good match and a very good reason to believe that this record is her, and it would have found it had the algorithm of the record matches determined that it is. But this is a way to augment this and find more gems that the record matches algorithm decided not to promote. Yes, so we talked about this and we looked at the tree. Other tools and techniques that you can use in the Census Helper. At the top right here of the list, there are some tools. Let's go over them. Search allows you to type a name, hit enter, and it will filter the list by anybody who has a first name, last name, or married surname, or even middle name that starts with this. So here is all the Goodmans, and I am basically condensing my list to that. Another thing that you can do is change the sorting order. So by default, we're sorting it by what we call the date added. And basically that means as you add more people to your tree, usually the later you add them also, the farther they are away from you, generally speaking, or that they were born recently and were just added to the tree. By default, the Census Helper just goes systematically over all the people in your tree, and it goes by the date that they were added because that's the way they're stored in the database, and just compiles the list. But sometimes that sorting order is not that useful. So you can change it to either by the relationship. So really the further they are away from you, the further down the list they will be, or by their age in the census, in this case 1940, so it shows 1940. So here, this is what I did. You can see that it sorts them by their age in the census, or sort by their last name. So it's alphabetical. A few other things that you can do here is to do a filter, and clicking here opens the filter section, which allows you at this point to select a letter, and it's like the old phone books, if anybody remembers them. I suspect you do. That just shows you all the people whose last name starts with G and the other letter as well. So these tools. Another thing that I kind of forgot to mention in the presentation is this download. So download is actually quite useful. It will create an Excel spreadsheet of all the information that you see here based on your search criteria and your sorting order and which year, of course, you're in, and whether you're seeing lower confidence as well. It will create an Excel spreadsheet. You can save it and then do some other research that you want and write notes there or remove people from the list or color them however you want. So this is another great tool that we supply here. Another thing to mention is that as you modify your tree and add information or change information, this list will show you that at the top, when you go there, it says, hey, we calculated it before, but you might want to refresh because you might have some new information. And then there is a refresh button that allows it to recalculate. Again, because calculating it can take 30 seconds, a minute if you have a very large tree. So we don't want to recalculate this list every time you get to this screen. You do it once per census, and if you make changes to your tree, you can refresh this list. What else do we have? So let's summarize what the Census Helper is. It's a new tool, just added it. It lets you organize your research based on a particular census. In the case of the 1950, which is useful because you don't have any information yet about who is in the 1950, so it gives you a good list of how to prepare your research once all these records are available. And it complements and connects with other research tools that are available on MyHeritage. We have the record matches and smart matches, which are a mechanism for our system to automatically find other records about people in your tree in other trees or in other record collections. And you can see, we showed you how these are connected. And of course, you can do what we call a research this person. Once you get to a person in your tree, you can run a search for a particular person in all record collections. The Census Helper does the opposite, and it lets you select a particular collection, census collection, and give an indication of all the people who could be there. And of course, we can always go to the search area and just enter a name manually and do a search. And it looks for all the records about this name, and then you can drill down to particular collections. So all of these tools work together, and Census Helper complements and is another way of searching and focusing your research on a particular year in a particular country. That's it. It's a pretty short presentation. It's a nice new tool that we wanted to tell everybody about. Back to you, Jeff.
There, thanks. I was just looking for my unmute button. Very good. Elaine says a very interesting, great tool. She can hardly wait to try it. She says, of course, after the webinar. But Elaine, I've got mine running while we're doing the webinar, so I can try to follow what Uri's been showing us. Uri, question, which membership do we need to be able to use the tool?
Right, so the tool is actually free, as I mentioned. You don't need to have any membership to actually access it.
Okay.
And run the list. So the list does not actually look at anything but information in your tree. So whatever tree you have with whatever membership you have on MyHeritage, it will run it and it will show you this list. However, if you do a research and you go into a census collection where you need to pay in order to see the records, then it will give you a paywall and ask you for a membership, for a subscription.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's go to Carnell, who says, already ran the Census Helper, and now I'm going back to perform some of the things that he learned from the presentation. So, Carnell, that's nice to hear. Could you remind us, this is a question from Rose, who says, I missed a concept. Once the Census Helper runs, can the results be saved? Could you show us, is that download button? Yeah, right there at the top right. And
yes, so if you want to, the results are saved in our database. So once you run it, and you go back to the screen, you see here that I went back to my screen. If you noticed, it actually came up immediately because it was saved and it's shown very quickly. Like I showed you here, though, you can do a save. It will create an Excel, and if I open it here, it will. Did it open it?
Is it going over to your other screen, maybe? Or do you have another?
No, I have only one screen. Let's do this again. Open. Here we go. Here. So we can see here that everything is, here are the names, the relationships of this person to me, when they lived, what would be their age in 1950, and a link that will basically run that research button if you want to do it from the Excel.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So this is where you can now sort it and color it and write any notes that you want here. So that's the way you would save it for research outside of this tool.
Yeah, what you just said, like coloring it, maybe I'm just thinking out loud here. Color it for when you've searched for that person, or color it for when you found them in the census. Yeah,
yes.
Good ideas.
Coloring of results here and in your tree in general is something that MyHeritage is planning to work on in the next half a year. Yes, we did this in DNA. If anybody remembers the DNA section, we already actually have a labeling and coloring system that we developed there.
Yeah.
There probably was a webinar
Yep.
about that as well.
Yep, there was.
And so, yeah, so we're going to take this concept and implement that also in the tree proper, and the
Nice.
lists and Census Helper and so on will be the tools that will utilize this mechanism as well in the future.
See,
Yeah.
Uri, this is why I love coming to MyHeritage webinars with you. We get to learn what's coming. Uh,
Yes.
Ruth is wondering, will this, so that speaking of the download, will that work with her spreadsheet, which is numbers for Apple? I noticed it downloads a CSV file, so I
Yes.
would assume
Right.
it would work in any spreadsheet. Is that right?
Yes, it's a regular CSV file, and any spreadsheet software knows how to open it, or you can upload it to Google Sheets or anything, and it will work.
Yeah, okay. Could you show us, since we have the live here,
Mhm.
Cassandra's wondering how to remove a suggestion from the list. Maybe don't actually do it, but
Yeah.
show us where that's
Right.
at.
So this is a good example here. This is my uncle, you see here. He was born in 1941, so he would have been 9 during the census. And he lived at some point in his life in Illinois. He was a professor. He's a professor in the university, and he did many sabbaticals, and he lived outside and lived in the States. But he's completely Israeli. He was 9 before I was born, 1950. He was living in Israel. There was no chance that he actually was in the census of 1950 in the US.
Okay.
So I would select here remove from list. And if I do that, you'll see that this row collapses and disappears.
Yeah. So if you do that, is there any way to put them back? Just in maybe it was a mistake that you did.
No, at this point, we
I'm
don't
guessing
have
probably
to
not.
undo,
Okay.
and looking at all the records that were removed.
Yeah. That'd be tricky to
Yeah,
figure out how to
interesting.
implement, I would think.
Yeah,
Okay.
writing here as a question.
If you're new to MyHeritage webinars, you'll notice that like Uri and Daniel, they've got a notepad next to their computer, and they write down our thoughts and suggestions. So another reason why
That
I
is
love
true.
working with MyHeritage. Um, yeah, this is an interesting one, and my ears perked up, Uri, when you mentioned the U.S. state censuses or other special kinds of censuses. And Graham is wondering, will you clarify whether or not those are there, or is that something that is perhaps coming in the future?
We're not planning to go into censuses of regions below the country level at this
Okay.
point.
All right.
We have a lot of those, for example, like, let's say, the Florida census.
Yeah.
In order to do that, you need to figure out that the person is likely to be living in Florida. There is a lot of immigration within the United States, so it's hard to predict if somebody hasn't lived in Florida according to wasn't born in Florida. It doesn't mean that they haven't lived in Florida. Many people migrate to Florida later in their life. Um, and one thing that in the United States, if I have information that the person lived before 1950 in the US, it's very likely that they stayed in the US all their life, although they might have moved out, but it's not that common.
Okay.
Within states, it's very difficult to make these predictions because there's a lot of movement and the results will be very unreliable
Okay.
if we did that. Yeah.
All right. Thanks. Let's
It's
go.
worth mentioning, though, that for countries not like the US, like, let's say, take Denmark, for example, uh, these are countries where people immigrated out of during 20th and 19th century a lot. So the logic of how to determine whether a person is likely to be, let's say, in the 1911 Danish census is somewhat different than to the US census because it's a country that people immigrated out of very often,
Yeah.
as opposed to the US, which is an immigration hub where people come into. So the logic is somewhat different between different types of countries.
Okay.
Census Helper.
Yeah. Thanks. Here's a good question from Lana. She says, how does it work for censuses with tick marks? Now, Lana's referring to pre-1850 U.S. censuses, and just curious to see, is between 1790 and 1840, are those in the list here in the Census Helper?
Yeah, we have them, but can you
Yeah, there they are.
elaborate on what you mean by tick marks?
Yeah, so between 1790 and 1840, it's just listing the head of the household. And so other people who might
Right,
not be the head of the household, they wouldn't be found by name in the census, but they would be represented by a tick mark, meaning they were between the ages of
right.
0 and 5 or 6 and 10. Um, and so I would say, yeah, it would still work, Lana. Uh, you may not find them by name in the census, but at least the census helper will tell you that they probably are represented in the
Hmm.
U.S. Census in those years. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes, that's a good point. We could potentially add more specific logic for that, so that if we know that the person was, let's say, only 5 years old
Yeah.
in the 1930 census,
Or 1830.
then let's say, a census of that nature, then we can potentially conclude that they are only mentioned by tick because they would be a child and they wouldn't be named.
Yeah.
And so on. If you were married and you were a woman, I guess the same thing as well. But we didn't add that
Yeah. I
twist to the plot here.
yeah.
But
I
that's a good point.
for now, I'd keep it how you have it, Uri, because me sometimes, I mean, we can often determine who those tick marks are, or assume to be, and I like to record them as potentially
Hmm.
represented by that tick mark. So I'm glad that this right now it does uh,
Yeah.
search how it does. So yeah, that's nice. So thank you for your questions. If you have other questions specific to the Census Helper, please do put those in your chat area. And while you're thinking of those, I'm going to switch over to my computer and let's just see what's coming up in our next few webinars. And we'll have a couple of door prizes to give away. Next, on June 14th, we'll have a webinar entitled Identifying Common Ancestors with DNA. So that sounds like a real winner. Next, we have Celebrating Family Events with MyHeritage, and then we have MyHeritage's latest photo innovations. So yeah, register for one or for all of those today, and then we'll see you then, and we'll send you a reminder email both one day and then also 2 hours in advance of the live webinar. And if you want to learn more from Uri Ganon, he's got a really nice, well, as you've noticed here today, he's a good teacher. He's also he is the man behind the scenes on these various tools. So it's really quite a treat to have him here in person explaining this. So you can go and learn more from him up at familytreewebinars.com / and then put his name in there, or at the webinar site you can just browse for him as well. Last month, a couple months ago, we learned different ways to view your tree at MyHeritage. We've learned about printing charts and books. This one was a really neat one, the new family tree and relationship diagram. These are all in the free area of the webinar site, so I hope that you enjoy these. And if you want to see everything that's either coming or that we've added to the webinar library, just head up to the webinar site and do a /MyHeritage webinars, and you can see that there's a nice collection of those there. Okay, door prize time. So if you're here, you're eligible to win. And if I call your name, just watch for an email from us. We'll first have the 1-year MyHeritage Complete plan, and this gives you everything that's up at MyHeritage, the Premium Plus Family Site subscription, the data subscription, and unlimited access to all of the records there. So our winner of this, we have Linda Latorno. Just writing down your name, making sure I've got it spelled right. Okay, Linda, congrats. I hope that was fun to hear your name on the air there. And then next, let's give away a MyHeritage DNA test kit. And if your name happens to be Fran Usuri, congratulations to you. You've got this DNA kit coming your way, myheritage.com/DNA. If your DNA happens to be, you had a test, outside of MyHeritage, you can import your DNA into MyHeritage, and then you now have access to a whole nother pool of DNA test takers. So if you haven't done that yet, be sure that you do that. All right, let's bring Uri back here, and let's see if we have any other questions. Yeah, Anita, I love where she's coming from about the Swedish household examination books, one of my all-time favorite records, also available at MyHeritage. I wouldn't suppose that those would be included in the Census Helper. Can you confirm that for me, Uri? The Census Helper's not looking at those examination books, right?
Yeah, that's correct. This is what I mentioned about censuses for a particular country in a particular year.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the census household examination books, which are not actually even censuses, but they're very closely linked to being a census, they're actually parish records. They were done throughout many years. So each of those censuses includes the span of many years across Sweden. So it's a lot more difficult to run the tool on that kind of a census.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Not all the records from the same year. Yeah.
But you're happy. I mean, we're lucky to know that MyHeritage does have those records, and boy, are they wonderful.
Yes. That's cool.
Question. So let me drag. I'm going to put my browser up on the screen here. I've just been looking at the 1790 U.S. Census here, just on my other monitor, and enjoying these tools. I didn't remember about these tools over here, Uri. So I've been enjoying using those. Jan is asking, how do I? So since I mentioned the DNA results when we were talking about the door prize, Jen says, how do I transfer the results from another company to MyHeritage? And I just hover over the DNA menu and click on Upload DNA Data, and then it will walk you through that process. So let's see, any other questions related to this topic? Looks like we've gone through them. Ray, Uri, let me answer this one. I think Ray's wondering about the webinar membership. Yeah, the webinar membership is not included with the MyHeritage subscription. However, all of the MyHeritage specific webinars up at familytreewebinars.com, yeah, those are indeed, the replays remain free. And then there's a whole nother collection of other classes that you can view the back library if you have a webinar membership. Yeah, Uri, it looks like you've done a really nice job. If people are not confused about this, I like how Therese concludes this. She says, "I'm very excited to use the Census Helper. Thanks for all your team's work to bring it to us." And she says, "This is the first year that I will appear as a 6-month-old baby. So good luck in finding yourself there in the 1950 census." So, Uri, any last final thoughts come to mind before we say goodbye?
No, just that we hope that our indexing of the 1950 census will be finished very soon, and all of this will make the tool even more powerful.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that. And yeah, nice job in educating us about this fantastic new tool. Thanks to all of you for being here and for sharing part of your day with us. And remember, life is short. Do genealogy first. Bye, everyone. Bye, Uri.